Hey, everybody. Truly fascinating discussion today with an industry expert and insider, Peter from GSMA Intelligence. Peter, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on the show, Evan.
Well, thanks for being here. Your expertise is really invaluable and look forward to diving in. I have lots of questions on the future of wireless, 5G, IoT, and beyond. But before that, for those who may not be familiar with your work at GSMAI and GSMA, maybe introduce yourself and the team and your
Sure,
mission at GSMA.
sure, wonderful. Well, thank you again. So, I think as a lot of folks know, GSMA, it's an industry organization, member organization. I think a lot of folks know us from running the MWC series of events, MWCs and the M360. So it's a big trade show. I think if you're in the telecom space, you probably know it. You probably know the work of the GSMA. GSMA Intelligence is the research and consulting arm. So I'm lucky enough to run a team of analysts, market research analysts who really a bunch of curious. You always hear this term analyst, right? I think some people throw this out there like, oh, what does an analyst do, right? Basically, just a bunch of curious economists, researchers who want to understand the market and help our members and the broader ecosystem, the technology and connectivity ecosystem, understand how to execute on the opportunities in front of them, right? We always talk about things like 5G, and we talk about, you mentioned, IoT and how, we push into verticals and all of this, but really, what does that mean? What are operators doing? What can they be doing better? And yeah, how do we really take advantage of all these capabilities?
Yeah, well, it's quite a job, and I always turn towards you guys for insights and analysis and understanding. So you and your team do an amazing job, and the events are fantastic. The last MWC Barcelona was just a tour de force of all things, not just wireless, but tech and AI in the future. It was really my favorite MWC, and I've been going since it was in Cannes in France, like 30 years ago. I was in the
Yeah,
paging industry, and we were worried this little thing called mobile GSM might disrupt the paging business.
those
So
those were those were the days. I wish I could take more credit. Our events team do an incredible job with the events. I'm just happy to support it, and it was great to see you there.
yeah, and indeed, looking forward to MWC Las Vegas here in the U.S. in October. So. But what are you tracking these days? Give us a state of the union, if you will, on the 5G space. It's been a long and winding road, to quote the Beatles, but it's in a really fascinating and major place right now. So much opportunity, so many new applications, and yet we're not standing still as an industry, right? We're continuing to push to the next level. What do you see as top of mind for you and the team?
No, and I think that's a great way the way you put it, right? And 5G, it's interesting because I kind of wonder at some point when we're going to sort of stop talking about 5G as being new or important or sort of tracking it. But it is something that we spent so much time building up for that I think it's important to recognize how far we've come, right? So I mean, you hit it right. It's been a long and winding road. If we look from our own data, at the end of Q1, this 2024, 1.7 billion connections, right? I mean, we all made
Wow.
a big deal when we passed 1 billion connections. Clearly, on our way to 2 billion in no time. That's 20% of all mobile connections, right? That's a significant, right? That's a significant number. 295 operators. It's, we're looking at 114 countries. I'm always amazed when I see these numbers just because I, I I went to foreign service school, but asked me to name 114 countries, and I might be. I mean, if I might be hard pressed to do this. So it's been impressive how quickly it's taken up. But what I think is really interesting and what we're looking at is sort of where this leads next, right? And you kind of mentioned that, right? So it's an interest in things like standalone, and we know that standalone has been something that we've been talking about for a while. It's been a little bit slower to ramp than expected, but when we go out there and we work with operators, and huge benefit of this job, right? We have great access to operators. What do we hear from them? We hear that about 80% of those who have 5G plan to have SA within the next 3 years, right? Not
Mm.
short time frame, right? But it says there is that roadmap, and obviously there's a lot of SA out there already, right? Not surprisingly, one of the top investment priorities, right? So, and particularly important for meeting their requirements in the enterprise, right? We know this, right? We know this from the beginning of 5G. Those B2B services, B2B markets were critical. Right? It was one of the main drivers for 5G. There is this recognition that SA is part of that, right? So I think that's one part. The other part, 5G advanced. You probably heard some of the news at MWC, 5G advanced. We know it's the next iteration. Some folks talk about it as 5.5G because you're always going to hear that, right? We had 3.5 and 4.5. We always want to sort of think in these numbers, right? Because we can't just sort of talk about release 18 and 19. We got to give these things numbers for them to be meaningful. But on the 5G advanced front, it's kind of a similar story to SA, where we see a lot of interest from operators, right? The number of operators that think that when they'll be able to get their hands on kit, want to launch 5G advanced, it's impressive, right? It's a top 3 technology priority. But I think it's really interesting here is when you look at a new technology generation. We saw this a bit with 5G, probably more so with things like 5G advanced and SA because technology has matured a bit. It's the question of what are they a trigger for, right? Because when you're going to launch a new technology, you're doing something different, right? So hey, I'm launching this new set of technologies. How do I want to rethink what I'm doing, right? And so what do we see with 5G advanced? We see a huge interest in API exposure. We see a huge interest in open networking, things like Open RAN. 71% of operators say they're either likely or very likely to look at 5G advanced as a trigger for open networking. 77% say the same thing for API exposure. And we can talk a bit more about API exposure because I think it's something that the industry's been talking about a lot. But I think that's really cool because it says it's not just sort of, okay, we're just doing the same thing over and over again. It's what do these new technologies enable in terms of technology and business shifts?
Yeah, really well said. And what's interesting is 5G is no longer just a developed market story in sort of the urban, suburban centers in the Western world. It's really opened up to developing markets, and a lot of the excitement, the heat, and the intensity is in those markets. How do you see that balancing act, and where are we with a global sort of rollout?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. It's a great point. I think, as always with these new technologies, there's you said you've been in the industry for long enough. You've probably heard these discussions every time a new technology comes up. There's a question of, can we see an opportunity for emerging markets to leapfrog, right? Hey, and instead of maybe they skip 4G and go right away to 5G, or they make that leap to take advantage of the new technology. That's always been difficult. It's always been difficult because early on the infrastructure costs are expensive. The prerequisites aren't necessarily there. The device costs are expensive. And I think in so many ways, 5G has been a device story, right? We've
Mm.
seen 5G proliferation in large part because the market was seeded with handsets, well, and consumers understood the value, right? So I think we've seen that. I mean, and that's been difficult. But as the prices have come down, you're 100% right. Right, we see this push into emerging markets, and especially when you look at our forecast, right, you see that change, right? You see the change from who are those early 5G markets to the more emerging markets coming later. But we need a couple things to make that happen, right? We definitely need affordable devices. Affordable devices that can put 5G in the hands of folks at a price point that makes sense.
Mm.
100% important. And sometimes that comes down to not just the devices themselves, but things like taxation, right? And our team has done a lot of work looking at sort of what are the role of different prices and different sort of price components and cost components around device affordability. Taxation, big part of that story, and that's obviously on the governments. But then obviously we need spectrum for those markets, and we need sort of a pro-investment friendly environment to actually allow that to happen. And then, of course, the use cases, right? So helping these markets understand how do they take advantage of not just the consumer side of things, which is important, and particularly things like FWA, huge interest in FWA around
Mm.
5G as a way to provide that home connectivity, but then also the vertical story with B2B.
Yeah, exciting times to be an industry watcher. And speaking of that, maybe describe how you at GSMA Intelligence sort of gather, analyze, forecast. What does that look like behind the scenes? When it comes to market trends and opportunities, we'd love a peek behind the curtain.
Yeah, it's I mean, I think So, like many market research firms, it is a combination of multiple sources, right? And that's the reality is you always have to have multiple sources to make sure you're getting that the real truth, right? Because you can't get it from any one source. So obviously we're looking at what's taking place. If you think about sort of from the market numbers, we're obviously looking at what is being reported, whether that's from regulators, whether that's from operators, whether that's tangentially, and triangulating that. Right, that's a big part of sort of how we build that. But then, obviously, we're incredibly fortunate to be sort of within the GSMA, which means we get to take part in things like the technology group meetings where the CTOs of all the top operators come together on a regular basis, the strategy group meetings. And so we get to hear from the folks that are driving the market, the folks that are, the operators, to understand their priorities. So we can sort of take that and take the numbers that we see and really and I can't say we're the first people to use this term, but what we want to deliver are data-driven insights, right? Leveraging the data that we have, access to operators. And, I talked a bit about some of those numbers in terms of, how 5G Advanced is being looked at as a trigger for API exposure. That comes from work we do with operators on a regular basis, going out to them, right? Same thing around when we look at energy efficiency and sustainability. And that's been a big focus for the industry, a big focus for us. A lot of those insights come from a benchmark that we run, working with operators around the world. It's at, I believe, 65 networks across the world to understand their energy efficiency and energy usage. Again, we have this advantage, and the luxury is why I came to take this job. It is the relationship with operators. And so we marry what's being said in the market with those relationships that we have to pull together those data-driven insights.
Wow, that's an amazing the work that goes on the behind the scenes. You mentioned sustainability and the move to greener tech. I think 5G is doing its part in that regard. But what are we making progress as an industry, and what has to be done, in your opinion?
Yeah, no, we definitely are making progress. And I say, when I think of the progress we're making, I can think of a few things, right? One, it's just sort of the number of operators that have committed to net zero targets, right? And that's 53 operators. So,
Wow.
really, and we're talking about some big ones, right? So major operators who said they've got net zero targets. Obviously, the dates differ, regions differ. What I think is interesting is it's not just that. I said that sort of those are commitments. What I think is interesting is, and you talked about 5G playing its part. When we look at sort of the time period from 2019 to 2022, and we're doing the work for 2023, getting the data from operators, but for that period from 2019 to 2022, and we look at energy intensity, right? So the amount of energy, the amount of energy that an average connection consumed to deliver a certain amount of data, right? What do we see? It actually decreased by about 10 to 20%. Right?
Wow.
So what that says is that we are getting more efficient, right? Which is great, and I think that makes sense because we see from the operators this interest in decreasing their carbon footprint, decreasing their amount of energy that they use, and we see no shortage of vendors, no shortage of network infrastructure suppliers ready to help them, right? So you've got a lot of AI solutions, you've got sleep solutions, you've got new, more efficient network technologies. And so I do think that we're seeing that, but there's always sort of the flip side here. The reality is what we see, and we look at sort of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, we see about 75% of the industry's overall carbon emissions are actually coming from the rest of the value chain. So it's scope 3, right? So it's stuff that's kind of beyond them, stuff that's maybe not in their direct control. As much as an operator might go, okay, I need more efficient networks. I need to be more efficient with the way I roll out my services. The supply chain side of things, customers, those represent the vast majority of their carbon emissions. And so that's something that obviously we all need to work on.
Yeah, and it's certainly headed in the right direction, but definitely not smooth sailing. Let's talk about challenges when you talk to operators around the world. What are some of the biggest challenges they see in the industry with their rollouts, with their revenue, with their market spaces, not just 5G, but IoT? What are they saying to you?
Yeah, I think what we're hearing, and obviously this differs from region to region. It's why I think we always take a regional view, particularly across the course of the year. You'll see these mobile economy reports for us, and those are particularly important because it's critical to recognize that the dynamics in a market like sub-Saharan Africa are different than they are in North America. But there are a number of similarities and common interests across the industry. I think one of those is, network monetization, 5G monetization. We
Mm.
talk about 5G monetization, but it's monetization in general, right? Whether it's on your 4G network, whether it's on your 5G network, 5G because we're talking about new investments. That's a big, right? That's obviously a big thing, right? How do I make money now that I've launched that, right? You probably heard that message 100 times at MWC. We hear it from the industry. I talked about the push on things like B2B services. We know new, more engaging consumer services are always big. And I think what I'm particularly interested in, and we've been doing a lot of work recently on, is some of the work around API exposure, the GSMA's Open Gateway Initiative. So
Mm.
exposing APIs, network capabilities in a consistent way so developers can develop to those capabilities at scale. It's been something that I think now there's around 50 operators who signed up to the initiative, about 2/3 of all global connections. So pretty good momentum so far. And I think the hope is, how do we see that a way of getting more use, getting more value out of those network investments? And then of course, you know, access to spectrum, something that operators are always trying to, make sure they have the right set of spectrum, right? So the right mix of low band, mid band, and high band, always particularly important. You see some recent work from us, and I think this is up currently on the platform. We did some work recently on that spectrum access side of things around a question around set-asides, because there's a number of markets where to drive enterprise use, to drive private wireless, have set-aside spectrum. Things like that kind of worry operators, and they go, well, is that taking spectrum away from us? We actually did some work to show that you actually don't see an increase in the uptake of private wireless. It doesn't really have a meaningful impact in the same way that you might expect. And so I think those are the kind of things that operators are focused on. And of course, new technologies, right? I talked about 5G advanced, talked about SA, AI, right? I mean, that was the one, that's been the topic of the last year. It's been a huge topic for telcos, how they engage with it, what's the right way to engage with it. We're doing a lot of work with them. I support sort of there's an AI task force that the GSMA runs. It's a huge topic for them, not necessarily as a challenge. And I think this is interesting, right? It kind of goes to the idea of a crisis being a challenge or an opportunity, but it is
Mhm.
that question of where's that line sit? And I think right now, and I'm guessing if you're like me, you're probably in the same place. Everyone feels like we're behind, right? Everyone's going, I'm not doing enough. I could be doing more. Why isn't everything in my life automated yet? Why am I not using Gen AI to do the Tim Ferriss 4-hour work week? I mean, if I wasn't doing the 4-hour work week before, I really should be doing the 4-hour work week now with Gen
Yeah,
AI.
it's got to be
I
the
think
4 minute work week for sure.
it's the
But
it's the Jet Jetsons, right?
exactly. But carriers have been using AI quietly behind the scenes for many years. Things like network planning and optimization and workforce management, all kinds of ways in the RF side for modeling. But it's really come to the fore now. What role are you seeing AI potentially being played in a practical way, this year and next?
And that's really a great point. I mean, I think that point is so worth doubling down on, right? Because Gen AI has, through the democratization of AI and Gen AI, right? Making it available to everyone, right? Making it something where your mother, your grandmother, everyone's using it and talking about it, and you get network effects, and everyone's using it. It sort of brought the topic of AI to the fore. But you hit it 100% right, right? AI is not new for telcos. They've been using it for
Hmm.
years in various parts of their network. How are they using it going forward? Again, some of the ways that they have been traditionally, right? Network planning, network modeling, network operations, proactive care. Those are the things that I think, continue to make sense. And I think we get it, right? Because that's kind of under their control, right? I don't want to call network sort of an easy win, but you sort of control that. It's a little bit easier. I think where we want to see and where the aspirations are going more towards how do we leverage these AI tools, and particularly things like Gen AI, for new revenue generation, right? Creating new services, delivering new services. How do we actually use this to be to grow the top line as opposed to just sort of helping me run my networks? Now, of course, you need to have a solid running network, a network that runs well to actually deliver that good customer service to help keep those customers. But how do we think about this? And I think that's the question next, of not just customer care, not just network operations, but new revenue generation. I think that's obviously what we're seeing a lot of interest in now.
Yeah, well said. Let's talk about the consumer side and mobile technology, smartphone demand a little bit. There's talk of sort of peak smartphone over the last couple years, and we've seen some challenges there. Um, I'm certainly not your average consumer, but I have two smartphones and four eSIMs, so that's just a signal of what might come for a lot of people. But how do you see consumer demand, and do you think AI and all these new applications will drive device demand? We're seeing a big uptick, for example, from some of the laptop and other companies for refreshes and upgrades. Do you think we're beyond peak smartphone now? Or is that even a reasonable characterization?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think obviously, early on, I think that there was a lot of skepticism over sort of the questions around AI PCs, and this term was thrown out there, and I will say I was a little disappointed to sort of see that we went from AI PC as a term that kind of was being driven by one part of the ecosystem to something that
Hmm.
some analysts were sort of just using as a term, right? We're just, hey, we're talking about AI PCs like it was a thing and not just sort of a marketing invention by, one of the suppliers. And early on, I think there was a lot of skepticism from some folks. Some folks clearly just bought into it because someone told them it was a thing. But I think a lot of us sort of said, show me what these AI PCs can do. And the early ones, I don't think necessarily showed off anything that great. Right?
Yeah,
If you were
it
at
was sort of an extra
CES,
button here or there, push for AI or
that's
something.
that's
Yeah,
that's exactly right. I think what we're seeing now, and if you follow sort of the news at Build, I think you're beginning to see some of this play out. Right? As you move some more of these capabilities, and you move some actual native AI, and you can move some models into the device, you begin. And to be fair, some of this just takes time. Right? It takes time. Okay, so
mm,
now I have some extra AI capabilities. What are we going to do with them? So I think that's great. We're driving this to on-device AI, and what I think is interesting is it's always just the question of, right, how do I drive more interest in the phones? I think that the other thing that's been trying for a while, I think we still continue to see a lot of iterations, foldables, right? I think it's been multiple years, right? We've been walking the foldable walk for quite a while, as you said, another long and winding road that continues to get more mature. So, I think it is the question of, if you're talking about peak smartphone in terms of, does everyone who wants a smartphone have one? There's still some folks out there, not many, right? But I think we are beginning to see some new use cases, new applications that make it a little bit more interesting to go out and buy one. And not just
yeah.
faster, right? Because it can't just be
Well,
faster with a bigger camera.
it meets my requirements, but yes, I agree. It can't just be that. I'm a bit of a geek, as you know, so I'll take faster and better camera any day.
Better
But
battery as well.
what
I mean, obviously, when we talk
better battery? Yes, please.
when we talk to consumers, that's it, right? Bigger battery as well.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great point. And what's really been exciting for me as a B2B and enterprise guy is just the tsunami of use cases across different industries. You see healthcare. I saw a company with a mobile sort of Star Trek communicator for nurses and doctors. They walk around hospitals, and we've seen in agriculture and farming so many applications of wireless for sensing and for helping autonomous tractors, on and on and on. That must be a big part of your research, is it not?
100%, 100%. I think, it all comes down to some of what you're talking about in terms of IoT, right? And I should say it all comes down, but a big part of it comes down to IoT, right? And connected devices. And that's been another sort of, overly hyped market.
Mm,
But the basic concept around vertical markets, enterprises, various industries beyond consumers needing, wanting, being able to profit from and see an ROI out of mobile connectivity. No one's going to argue with that, right? But again, it takes a while, right? It takes a while not just to figure out these use cases, but to actually build them into business processes. And so we're seeing them, right? And the number of use cases that are out there continues to grow. We've got a big push within my team looking at fintech, looking at manufacturing,
Mm,
and the use cases for things like slicing, for things like edge compute, for things like SA. A lot of them are just, they're fairly obvious. I talked about a bit about the work that we're doing on Open Gateway. What's really interesting there was the launch, and you may have seen this in the news, right? There was a launch in Brazil where you saw the operators get together with Claro, TIM, and Vivo to launch a number of, come around and launch some common APIs, right? SIM swap, number verified, device location.
mm,
One of the biggest applications, right? It's around fraud, it's around security, it's around things like banking, right? 2/3 of the banking transactions in Brazil are conducted via mobile banking, right? So when you can secure that via a device, right? And then we're not even talking about an IoT device, but by a device to know that that person is that person. Incredible
mm.
opportunities, right? And that's just one, that's just one vertical, but I think all verticals can benefit, and we're seeing that play out.
Yeah, exciting times. The other megatrend that I'm personally fascinated with is direct to satellite. We've seen all the partnerships being played out between satellite companies and mobile operators. Looks like it's a great partnership. It's not competing. It's not complementing. It's really coming together to offer what is a pretty magnificent opportunity, voice, data, video in areas not covered by wireless services. I mean, it's almost science fiction when you think about direct to satellite. But what are you seeing in terms of take up of these kind
You're
of
you're
services this year and next year?
you're 100% right. I think we spent a lot of time early on going, sort of where are we in this sort of frenemy relationship, right?
Mm,
And I think that some operators, and I get it, right? Because some operators are thinking, well, this is gonna, I don't have to expand my network. I can just use this, right? And so network
mm,
vendors were like, oh, maybe we need to be a little bit careful. But I think we're beginning to see how the two things play out. And what's interesting, I think what's really great is this is sort of the year where we're going to see that uptake. Spent a lot of year building out those constellations, building out the relationships. You saw the Verizon news this week after AT&T working with AST. We know where we are with, folks like Starlink. You know, you see this across the world. I think now that we have the relationships in place and the constellations are in place, this is the year we begin to see how that pays off. And I can just say it is one of those spaces that's kind of so frothy because there's a lot of suppliers. We don't know how this plays out in the long term, but we decided last year, and this has been a big research focus for my team. We decided last year to run a summit at MWC Las Vegas around satellite. So much interest,
mm.
right? It was one of those things where we're like, it's on the first day. It's kind of to the side, low expectations in terms of how many people we'll have in the seats, but it was great, right? The interest was great. We saw the same thing in Barcelona, and I think that you definitely see a lot of folks trying to understand what is the role of satellites in their sort of connectivity strategies, and yeah, it'll be fun to see now that we've got the constellations in place how it plays out this year.
Yeah, fantastic to watch. Guess a final note to it. How should folks who want to get involved in the GSMA intelligence community in an organic way get involved? And also, you do a lot of course, paid engagements and webinars and marketing. How can folks engage with you who may not be familiar with your
No,
work?
great, thanks, and thanks for the question. I mean, easiest way, www.gsmaintelligence.com. You can go there, sign up for our newsletter.
Mm,
It's free, right? Newsletter is free. You see sort of extracts from our research. We have a lot of free research. We obviously have a page service. So if you see something that you don't have access to, obviously you can go and sort of reach out. Lots of email contacts, and right or wrong, and don't always know if my sales folks always love this. You can always reach out to me, right? I'm on socials. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm at pjarich@gsma.com. That's
some free insight. Yeah.
Pjarich
What
at
could go
GSMA.
wrong? Yeah. Free
Yeah, yeah, that's
analysis. Yeah.
that's the problem. Sometimes I and I will say, and I think that's what I really love about my team is that, when you're excited about this stuff, sometimes you just want to share it. And some instances, like, maybe you should not share with people that don't pay you for your insights, but when you're excited about it, you really want to have these conversations and share it. So please go to the site, reach out directly if you want to, and I would just love to hear from everyone.
Fantastic. What are you looking forward to this summer? Maybe a bit of downtime, or do you
Yeah,
still have
I
a lot
hope
of travel and
I
stuff
hope
on
I hope
the agenda?
I hope a little bit. We definitely have some travel. I think I've got a number of folks from my team who are heading to MWC Shanghai, which is coming
Mm,
up. Great
amazing.
event. I have a number of customer events, and I'm gonna head to the Olympics.
Oh, wow.
I'm based in London, where the GSMA is, and so it's an easy trip over to go see the Olympics down in Paris. And in part, as much as I'm sure my wife will be annoyed by it, also to just pay attention to all the connectivity, right? The connectivity that it takes to make an event like that take place. I've got an old friend in
Yeah, I'm
college
one of
who's
those
actually
guys like
doing some
yourself who walk
comms.
around and look at cell phone towers and comment on
Yeah,
different arrays. And yes, it's an illness,
I'll do
but
it. I'll do it
it's
surreptitiously so my wife doesn't get too annoyed.
okay. Well, have a great trip. Have a great summer. Look forward to your feedback from the Olympics. It should be amazing. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Evan.
Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.